it makes sense to push those two buttons right together, pressing it from V-lock to GPS and unsuspending it. Now you're going to want to come over, and depending on whether the missed approach procedure has a certain heading, you got to, again, you will have briefed your missed approach procedure. If it says climb to 2,500 with a certain heading, you're going to want to press, you want to have the heading bug synced. You're going to want to turn the heading bug to that heading and press the heading. Or if you're just navigating to a fix, then you will want to press the nav button. So this procedure here is a little bit different. This procedure here can vary depending on what the missed approach procedure is. But I just said press nav button. Okay, so now I would say come around. So we're going up like this, read it, press this button here, came over here, and then the last thing is just come back around and maybe put the flaps up. I mean, it may have been better to power up, go around, flaps up, I don't know. But I don't think 2 notches of flaps usually, if you do an approach with that's not gonna, that's just the way you do a short field procedure anyway. So that little bit of drag doesn't really hurt you. So I felt that, of course, people can argue about that. That's just the way I did it. And verify the GPS is sequenced to the first fix on the missed approach. So your eye is going to want to come over to the GPS and make sure, you know, in your GPS 430 always tells you what your next fix is. So you want to anticipate all that. So the only other procedure, the thing that would be different for this is for an iOS. This is the most complicated, and this is a bit to do when because you got to do this within about. Well, the main thing is when you're climbing out, our airplanes aren't that fast. So it's just, you know, it's not that much to do because you're not climbing up that. It's not like you're going to bust through 2,500 feet in 30 seconds or something like that, like you would on, you know, something more high performance.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I've got it. So this will work. But the number 5 going from, you know, for an ILS missed approach or a localizer missed approach, switching back to GPS navigation. So the missed approach for 1-3 is climb straight to 900 feet, then a climbing turn to the right to 3,200 feet.
Yeah.
The outlet.
Yeah.
Now,
so you want to have outlet. So outlet's going to be in the GPS.
I know, but if you're check riding or anything like that, they will shit a brick if you fly the GPS route to outlet and not the localizer route to outlet. So I mean,
What do you mean the local? You know, is the outlet defined? I'm not looking at the plate. Is the localizer defined as a fix off of a VOR?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
You're not
off the
gonna do
line.
that in reality.
I don't think that the only thing you're required to fly the localizer is the final approach course.
Right.
So if you're doing the missed approach and you're flying GPS, that's not going to be a problem.
That's, you know.
My only concern was, you know, I know you guys can't see it, but you do the climbing
I
right
can put it
turn
on.
versus going direct to outlet versus flying the radials. Is that ever going to bite you? That's
Well, maybe on a check ride if you have a dig for a.
no, even
We
here.
have plenty of those, incidentally. We have plenty of those, incidentally.
No, but even here, so you climb out 1-3, you crank it to the right, outlet may take you right directly over the runway and shoot you straight that way versus coming
Oh,
around.
I see what you mean because you're following a radial in.
Right.
But the GPS should follow that radial.
It'll follow the same routes.
Will it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I'm pretty sure that, yeah, again,
I'm just, the only reason I bring this up was because when I would fly, so if I shot the ILS 1-3, you know, you're supposed to dial in the radials for outlet, for brag, for pagoda, versus using what the GPS is telling you, outlet, brag, and pagoda, because the other planes you fly may not have a GPS in
see
it.
the GPS should follow. That should all be programmed in there. I see what you mean. In other words, if you tell it to go direct outlet, you might just do that path.
Right.
The
And then-
GPS
and then
should.
you have to do a.
It should have all
Pure
that
route.
programmed into it.
I'm just curious, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at that, but basically, it'd be part of your briefing, looking at.
Because when I went with John, We did our mock check ride.
You want the,
No, it's all right. You know, especially with an ILS, and it was things I didn't even think about. You know, there's times to all of these different things here, and you're flying the GPS, and yeah, you know you're at outlet, you know you're 2 miles from Bragg, you're 5 miles from Pagoda, whatever. But if you're not following it from the VOR perspective, and you're letting the GPS tell you your position,
you should be, remember the GPS, a WAS GPS, can be used in loop. You don't have to necessarily use the number 2. Like what if you don't have a number 2 CDI? You can just use the GPS, a WAS GPS, to identify these fixes. You don't need to use these radials to identify those fixes.
it was just burned into my brain to do it
Yeah,
one way versus the other.
yeah, I get it.
I just don't want
see what
to make confusion.
No,
see
you
what
know,
you mean.
when
Go ahead, John.
there was a time when there was confusion about
Because it's like, how do you
whether or
know the
not you
final
could,
approach?
whether or
I
not
set the
you could,
time
on a
already,
check
but it
ride,
is.
whether or not you could use the GPS at all, you know. And I used, in abundance of caution, I used to get kind of direct everybody away from that. But it's now more clear, talking to examiners and so forth, as long as you use the IL, or as long as you use the VOR or VLOC mode on the final approach course, you're legal. You're not going to have a problem in the check ride.
That was the only question I had.
Regardless of what you use to mark the fixes. You can use either one, right?
In other words, yeah, he's saying,
You can use the radio or
you
you
can
can
use
use-
you can identify these fixes by the the needle on the number 2 one. As soon as 030 centers, you know you're in Bragg.
Right.
That is the old. That's what we did before we had
Right,
GPS.
Yeah,
right.
sure.
So now you can use the GPS to identify Bragg as
Yes.
opposed to the radio?
Oh, I
Okay.
never dial in a number 2.
No, okay.
Now in 7.3
Every time
kilo,
I
the
fly.
number 2 radio, now will give you DME.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it tells you. Okay. So I think that's all that I have. Any other questions on anything? Because I know it's a lot of material. So if I can
How
go
about a
back-
normal landing when you were coming in the glide slope and everything and then, you
Yeah, so
know,
basically,
go in the flare and all this stuff, does this thing flash off at somebody?
well, then basically what I do is when I see the runway, and I just hit the red button, and everything just goes away.
Doesn't
Okay,
that-
that's
does
what
the
I
auto-
wanna know.
Yeah.
Yeah, does the autopilot shut off or disconnect at any specific altitude?
No, you've got to shut it off. In other words, it'll just,
it'll
if you're
fly
flying
into
a
the
glide
ground.
slope, it'll just,
Yeah, fly to
it'll
the
just go
ground.
all the way to the ground. It'll just take you right to the 1,000-foot markers.
Then we better know that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
especially,
yeah,
especially if
right.
it's 0-0 and you're not thinking. Crunch.
Yeah, right.
You'd be the first one to the accident site.
The last one to leave.
See, it's
Well, if you time the go around just right,
So you just kill the autopilot right when you see the runway, or right when you get to the final approach fix, or do you keep the autopilot on? Like theoretically, you could just pull the throttles back and let the autopilot fly closer to the ground, right?
No.
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 no,
Okay.
legally.
It's not legal.
Basically once, well, especially in part 135 and even in the 121 and some world and stuff like that, we're allowed to, you have to, autopilot has to come off at like decision height.
Okay.
Or if you're doing it like a category 2, it has to come off. We're actually allowed, like, if you're doing a category 2, you have to have like a whole list of stuff has to work. And you're allowed to have 100-foot minimums. And then you actually can get down to like 50 feet because it understands that by the time, by the time the autopilot gets kicked off or something, or is it, by the time you hit it off, you've already lost 50 feet. So it's, yeah, but definitely the rule of thumb, that is good to get back to the rules of thumb and stuff. Again, don't put the autopilot on. Like in 135, I'm not allowed to put it on before like 600 feet AGL. So you always want to make sure that the airplane's climbing and stuff like that. You don't want to just rotate and put the autopilot on. So what if it does something weird?
Yeah, right.
You don't have,
Right.
if it just pitches down and you're 50 feet, yeah.
Like
You
a
never
mouse.
turn the autopilot on before like 600 feet AGL, and always turn it off before, certainly by, when you see certainly by the
Yeah,
time
once
you're
you
at
got it
200
made.
feet.
Yeah.
What?
Once you got
Once you got it, yeah, because then you're going to want
Flip it
to,
off.
you might want to put another notch,
Yeah.
if you break out at 500 feet, you're going to want to have, but you might want to put another notch of flaps in, maybe. So although ILS usually isn't a short field, you usually can land with 2 notches of flaps. Isn't a problem. Or 1, or however you do. What were you gonna say? You gonna say something, Guy? Oh. I have some more time. It is 11 o'clock. I didn't know if you guys wanted to. There's another slide you want to be. That's really all I had. I can go back to any other slide that I had if anyone has any other questions or procedures. Or again, the main thing is to know how to read this scoreboard and know what to expect, and make sure if something's on the standby that's what you expect to see. And then when it captures it, if you're going to capture an altitude, make sure it locks on. Make sure you don't, if it's still descending, some of the other little gotcha points. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Make sure it's captured, like they say, like you're supposed to hold 3,000 feet, and then you want to get down to 2,000. But if, say, for instance, I've heard this: maintain 3,000 until you get to a certain point, then you go down to 2,000. So if you're coming down, you haven't gotten to that point yet. If it hasn't locked, that's why you want to watch the scoreboard. If this is still, in this case here, it's going up. But if it hasn't locked on the altitude, it doesn't say, if you don't have a green ALT, then don't. If you turn the altitude, it's going to keep going down. You're going to bust your altitude because you were supposed to hold 3,000 so you got to a certain fix, and then. Once it captures that altitude, you can go down to 2,000 feet. And then all you have to do when you get to that fix is just press the or go back to your VS, and then spin the wheel down to 500. That's all you have to do when you get to the fix, because you've already set your altitude. It's always set. I mean, this is just getting back to general practices. Whenever you're coming in for a landing, you always want to stay way ahead of the airplane, especially when you're faster airplanes. If you get a faster airplane and it has an autopilot in it, you're going to want to, things happen faster. So you want to, like, when I had when I was doing IOE at instantly had something called an initial operating experience at when I was a commuter. One of the guys said, he says, when I'm cruising, I'm thinking about my next flight already. It's like, so he's so far ahead of the airplane, he was making a joke. But the point is, when you're setting up for you want to be thinking about your missed approach. When you're cruising, you want to have everything programmed, what you're doing, and have thought about everything. When you're, probably by the time you're in your descent, you want to know what the missed approach procedure is. You want to be like 3 steps ahead of the airplane.
I would think if there's any argument for ever having a simulator, this is probably it.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we would have to have a simulator to be able to
Yeah,
make sure, if it has a simulator, to make sure that you can, because that is something to practice. In other words, go up there and say,
Well, yes,
sit down and sit down and say,
Yeah.
okay, just go through with an instructor, say,
Or coming up with a procedure.
yourself. I mean, like I said, I came up with a procedure that I thought worked for me, but you might want to come up with a procedure for, for different phases of flight.
Now that's a hollow bar on the flight director displayed there. Can you show a solid bar? Just to emphasize the difference.
Yeah. I think there was plenty of those.
It's
Right
solid.
there. Yeah. Right there's that's where the solid bar would look.
When the autopilot's flying.
But the autopilot's flying, yeah. So it's just, the difference is it's just hollow like that. Of course, in this case here, we're just flying straight and level. And I guess the other point to make is just when I don't think I had a slide of this, but when you're taking off, it just says pitch, and it just says ROL here, and there's nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. I think it's a picture in the booklet, a picture in the manual. I have this one right here. It shows that. It shows the roll. It says roll, doesn't say pitch. So in this case here, this person's climbing, but they're not. They didn't tell it. They just told it. They didn't tell it how it wants to turn. So it's just going to keep the wings level and climb straight out. In this case here, I wouldn't do this, but see, they're climbing vertical speed. Let's see if they have, trying to see here if they have a picture of, yeah, here's the difference. Hollow,
See, there it's not as obvious.
you know, it's not very, a better way to see it is by looking at your command bars. And if you see the AP on, then that means the autopilot's on.
Little things on the military things.
Trying to see if there's a, I was trying to see if it, something of what it looks like is just when you hit the go around button. Not really. I think it's everything.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, good job.
Yeah, thanks.
Good preparation.